The year is 1847. The air above Tehran carries the scent of jasmine and smoke. Inside the marble walls of Golistan Palace, candles burn low against mirrors too large for their own reflections, and somewhere deep within those corridors beyond the mosaic halls and silk curtains, a scream begins. It is not the cry of pain, not yet. It is sharper, higher, something animal and untranslatable. It trembles through the stone like a crack forming in glass. The guards outside the women's quarters stiffen, then look away. They have heard it before. Everyone has. They pretend not to notice, because to notice is to acknowledge the ritual that owns the night. The scream belongs to Princess Zara, daughter of Asher, granddaughter of a dynasty that has ruled Persia for centuries, 16 years old, newly adorned, and already vanishing into the machinery of empire. By dawn, she will be called a bride. By midnight, she has become something else entirely, an empty vessel sculpted from the ruins of a mind that once belonged to a girl. The palace stands like a living contradiction, a fortress made of light and cruelty. The marble floors gleam with reflections of chandeliers hung from ceilings painted with angels, but beneath that beauty lingers the smell of fear. It is faint, like rosewater gone sour. The walls of Golistan are lined with portraits of men shahs, poets, generals' eyes, painted to follow you down the corridor. There are no portraits of the women who lived and died here. Their existence is written only in whispers, in the subtle language of silence. In the women's quarters, time moves differently. Hours fold into each other. Days pass without change, except for the slow dismantling of another young girl's will. The women who serve the palace, the matrons, the overseers, the midwives of obedience, move like shadows in patterned silence. They wear their trauma like jewelry, polished smooth by repetition. Once, long ago, they were brides too. Once, they screamed as Zara screams now. The sound didn't end with them. It was passed down, generation to generation, a kind of inheritance that carried no blood, but infinite consequence. Zara's chamber is lit by 21 candles. The number is symbolic, one for each generation of royal daughters who preceded her. On the table beside her bed lies the bridal silk, folded precisely 3 times. It glows faintly in the candlelight, white, embroidered with gold thread, so heavy that it holds its own shape, as though waiting to devour the girl who will wear it. The silk smells of rose oil and iron. Everything in the room is beautiful. Nothing in the room is kind. The women who prepared her sit in the adjoining chamber, drinking tea they cannot taste. They keep their eyes on the floor. They do not speak. They have done this before. They will do it again. What they have just completed, those 6 long months of instruction, is not etiquette. It is not preparation for marriage. It is a ritual of psychological dismantling perfected through centuries. The empire calls it Tarbiat-e Arus, the education of brides. But everyone inside these walls knows the truth. It is a process of unmaking. Outside, the wind moves through the courtyard trees with a low sigh. Somewhere, a night watchman hums to himself to keep from thinking about the sound that echoes through the marble. The scream rises again, higher, more desperate, then collapses into a series of broken sobs. The guards do not move. The eunuchs guarding the harem bow their heads. It is not their place to intervene. The ritual must complete itself. Zara's story began like so many before it. With a decision made in a chamber she was not allowed to enter. At 14, she was chosen as the 3rd wife of General Hassan Khan, a man nearly 3 times her age. His gift to the Shah for her hand was not flowers or jewels, but 3 entire provinces, fertile land and loyal soldiers, the true currency of empire. Zara's consent was unnecessary. The empire needed alliances, not affection. When her engagement was announced, Zara's life narrowed like a corridor closing behind her. The gardens she once wandered freely were now forbidden. Her tutors were dismissed. Her laughter became a liability. A eunuch was assigned to follow her every step. Her days filled with lessons in silence, obedience, and stillness, and each lesson carried a quiet cruelty. Her words restricted to 43 approved phrases, her movements choreographed into the 8 gestures of submission. Each bow, each tilt of the head, each step designed to erase her sense of control. The first to break was her voice. Speech became rationed like air. For weeks, she was allowed to speak only when spoken to, and only in the language of deference. "Forgive my inadequacy, as you command. With permission, may I?" These phrases became her world. Thought and language decayed together. The less she could speak, the less she could think in words that belonged to herself. The palace had discovered an ancient truth. Silence is the purest form of control. By the 3rd month, she had learned to stop meeting anyone's eyes. Her body followed. She was taught to walk with her head lowered at exactly 30 degrees, no more, no less, to move no faster than the measured rhythm of her own heartbeat, to occupy no more space than necessary. The women who trained her corrected every gesture until her very posture became a confession. "You are not a person," their eyes said. "You are a reflection of someone else's desire." The days bled into nights. The candle wax thickened like memory. Zara began to lose her sense of sequence, what had happened yesterday, what might happen tomorrow. In her dreams, she walked through endless corridors that smelled of rosewater and iron, chased by whispers that spoke in her own voice. When she awoke, the world outside her window had not changed. The sky above the courtyard was always the same color, that pale, exhausted blue before dawn. By the 5th month, the overseer of brides, an ancient woman named Mariam, declared her ready. Zara no longer spoke unless prompted. She no longer stood upright without permission. She no longer reacted when touched or corrected. Her body moved as instructed. Her mind drifted somewhere unreachable. "She is calm now," Mariam told the others. "She will not resist." That calmness was the empire's masterpiece, the perfection of control through fear disguised as discipline. To the court, Zara was an ideal bride, modest, obedient, beautiful. To herself, she was a ghost wearing human skin. And yet, beneath the quiet, something inside her still flickered. On the final night before her wedding, when she was left alone in her chamber, she wrote 3 lines in a hidden notebook, her last act of rebellion. "They have taken my name from me. I am a shadow they have taught to smile. But even shadows remember light." That notebook would not survive. It would be burned after her wedding night, as all bride's possessions were. But somehow the words persisted, whispered from servant to servant, a secret prayer carried in memory. And so the scream that shook the palace that night was not only Zara's. It was the sound of every erased girl whose silence had been carved into obedience. It was the sound of centuries remembering themselves. When morning came, the palace was quiet again. The tea was poured, the candles were replaced, the world continued as though nothing had happened. But if you had stood in that corridor just before dawn when the air still trembled from the echo, you might have heard something faint, something almost human in the marble's cold breath. Not pain, not madness, just the whisper of a soul refusing to disappear. The empire believed that obedience could be built like architecture, measured, calculated, perfected through ritual and repetition. The palace was its blueprint, and the brides were its foundations. Every wall, every rule, every whispered command existed to teach the same lesson. Submission is not an act, but a structure. It must stand on its own, even when no one is watching. The 6 months before Princess Zara's wedding were not months at all. They were a dismantling disguised as time. Every dawn began the same way. A slow knock on her chamber door, the rustle of silk, the sound of sandals scraping against marble. Then came the voice of Zainab, the mistress of ritual, steady and sharp as a knife drawn across glass. "Rise, child," she would say. "You are not yet ready to be seen." Zara would rise. She would bow. She would not answer unless spoken to. The training was divided into 3 sacred disciplines: silence, posture, and devotion. The holy trinity of obedience. Silence came first. It began not with the forbidding of words, but with the cultivation of doubt. Every time Zara spoke, she was corrected. Too loud, too slow, too eager, too proud. Each reprimand was delivered not with anger, but disappointment, a far more efficient form of punishment. Within weeks, her voice began to hesitate before leaving her throat, as if seeking permission from the air itself. By the 2nd month, hesitation became habit. Words turned to ghosts that hovered behind her teeth, but never crossed her lips. Silence, Zainab explained, was the highest form of grace. A woman who does not speak cannot sin. A woman who cannot sin cannot shame her husband. A woman who cannot shame her husband lives forever in his favor. Zara nodded, though she didn't understand. She thought of her mother's voice, the warmth of it, the laughter that once filled the courtyard, and realized she hadn't heard it in months. Then came posture. This was the architecture of the body, the way the spine must bow but not break, the way the neck must incline without trembling. The 8 movements were repeated until muscle memory replaced will. The greeting bow, the offering gesture, the withdrawal step, each a vocabulary of compliance carved into her nerves. For 3 hours each morning, she practiced beneath the watchful eyes of the overseers. If her movement was too graceful, it was arrogance. If too clumsy, shame. The perfect balance was servitude disguised as elegance. "Do not move as yourself," Zainab said once, circling her like a hawk. "Move as someone who knows she does not belong to herself." By the 3rd month, Zara's body responded to authority before her mind could process it. When anyone of rank entered the room, she bowed automatically, even if she didn't know who it was. Her body had learned fear faster than her thoughts could form it. The 3rd discipline, devotion, was the most dangerous. It was not religious. It was political theology disguised as faith. Zara was told that obedience was sacred, that the Shah's will flowed through all men of power, that resistance was sin against divine order. "Your body is the empire's property," the overseers said. "Your husband is its guardian. Your obedience is its strength." Each night, she was made to kneel before a gilded mirror and recite verses written in ancient Persian calligraphy. "I am the moon reflected in another's light. My will is borrowed, my silence eternal." She recited these lines until they lost meaning, until the rhythm became a lullaby her mind clung to for comfort. In that repetition, something inside her began to detach. Not to die, but to observe. A small part of her consciousness floated above the rituals, watching with faint curiosity as her own identity dissolved like salt in water. The women who trained her were not cruel in the way men are cruel. Their cruelty was colder, cleaner, the cruelty of those who have survived by perfecting the system that destroyed them. Zainab had once been a princess herself. Mariam, the elder overseer, had been sold to the palace at 12. They did not think of themselves as tormentors. They thought of themselves as protectors. "We are saving you from rebellion," they told Zara. "A rebellious wife dies quickly. An obedient one lives long enough to raise her children." But Zara could feel the contradiction in every gesture. Their compassion was precise and hollow. They would brush a strand of her hair from her face before ordering her to kneel. They would call her child while correcting her posture until her muscles trembled. Their touch alternated between maternal and mechanical, the rhythm of tenderness fused with terror. The training extended into every moment of her existence. Even her dreams were colonized. When she slept, the overseers entered her room to ensure she rested in the correct posture, lying on her right side, facing east, hands folded neatly beneath her chin. If she turned during sleep, she was woken and corrected. "Even unconsciousness must learn obedience," Zanab whispered. During meals, the girls in preparation, 7 of them, all between 14 and 17, sat in absolute silence. They were forbidden to look at one another. Food was served in measured portions, never too much, never too little. Hunger was encouraged as a lesson in restraint. Every act, even eating, became a practice in control. Isolation was their most powerful weapon. When Zara once spoke out of turn, a single question, softly asked, she was confined alone for 3 days. No words, no sound, no light, but a narrow slit of dawn through the lattice window. The first day, she wept. The second, she prayed. The third, she stopped doing either. When they released her, she thanked them. They called this progress. By the 4th month, the distinction between discipline and reality began to blur. Zara no longer felt the need to disobey. It wasn't fear. It was the absence of alternatives. Her body had become fluent in submission. Her silence no longer felt forced. It felt natural. When she glimpsed her reflection in the polished bronze of the water basin, she barely recognized the girl staring back. Her eyes looked older, emptier, like wells where thought had been drained. The testing rituals began soon after. Random inspections, sudden corrections, invented faults. One day, Zanab would praise her for humility. The next, she would strike her wrist lightly and say, "You have grown proud." The inconsistency was deliberate, a psychological maze with no exit. Zara learned that effort had no reward, that virtue and failure were indistinguishable. Her nervous system adapted to uncertainty. Her heart began to beat faster for no reason. The palace had found a way to train not just the body, but the pulse. There were moments, fleeting, fragile, when Zara remembered she was human. Once, during prayer, she noticed a bird trapped between the courtyard bars. Its wings beat against the lattice, desperate for escape. A servant freed it quietly when no one was watching. The bird flew toward the sun, and Zara's eyes filled with tears she could not explain. That night, when she knelt before the mirror and recited her verses, her voice cracked. Zanab's hand landed lightly on her shoulder. "Do not weep," she said, "even tears must obey." By the end of the 5th month, Zara no longer needed correction. Her posture was perfect, her speech minimal, her heartbeat steady. The overseers watched with satisfaction. "She is ready," Mariam said. "Her soul is clean of self." But there was no triumph in Zara's stillness. Inside the palace of her body, a small voice still whispered, faint but alive. It said nothing coherent, just fragments of what she once believed. Poetry she had loved, laughter she had known, the way light used to fall through the pomegranate trees. It was not rebellion. It was memory refusing to die. When the 6th month began, the palace gates were draped in silk. The wedding preparations had started. Zara's training ended not because she was free, but because there was nothing left to train. She had become the architecture itself, beautiful, hollow, and perfectly obedient. And when she walked through the marble corridors that final night, her footsteps made no sound. It was as if the palace itself was walking her to her fate. The night began with ceremony, the kind of ceremony that conceals cruelty beneath perfection. Every corridor of Golestan Palace glowed in candlelight, the marble floors polished so bright that they mirrored the heavens. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain and pomegranate blossoms, and the city below lay silent, as if the entire world was holding its breath for the spectacle within. Inside, servants moved like ghosts through the gilded halls, whispering the same words they had whispered for generations. The bride is ready. Princess Zara sat in the center of her chamber, motionless, as a dozen hands worked to make her beautiful. Her hair was brushed until it shone like black glass. Her skin was powdered until it no longer looked alive. The gown they placed upon her shimmered white and gold, so heavy with embroidery that she could barely lift her arms. Every fold of silk was another layer between her and the world. A cocoon, not of transformation, but of containment. Around her, the women hummed softly. The melody was ancient, one sung during countless royal weddings before hers, its lyrics half religious, half curse. Obedience is peace. Peace is beauty. Beauty is the mark of the chosen. The rhythm was slow, hypnotic. It felt less like a song and more like a spell. Zara's eyes stared straight ahead, unfocused. The opium tincture they had given her at dusk dulled her panic, coating every thought in fog. Somewhere inside that haze, her mind tried to speak to her body, to tell it to run, to scream, to move. But the signal never arrived. Her limbs belonged to someone else now. Through the open lattice, she could hear the muffled sound of celebration from the outer courtyard. Laughter, music, the metallic clink of goblets. They were celebrating her wedding to a man she had never spoken to. A man who had purchased her with 3 provinces and a promise of loyalty. General Hassan Khan, 43 years old, war hero, twice widowed. The empire called him honorable. His servants called him patient. The women who had once shared his chambers never called him anything at all. When the final ornament was fastened, the overseer of brides, Mariam, stepped forward. Her face was expressionless, her eyes black and unreadable. "Rise," she said softly. "It is time." Zara obeyed. Her body moved with precision, every step measured, every bow rehearsed. 2 servants carried the train of her gown as she was led down the long corridor toward the Chamber of Union, a room no woman entered twice in innocence. The air grew warmer as they approached, thick with incense and oil. The golden doors loomed ahead, carved with scenes of mythical lovers, divine figures painted with faces that looked nothing like hers. At the threshold, Mariam stopped. She adjusted the folds of Zara's gown, smoothed the silk over her shoulders, and whispered the final instruction. "You will not resist. You will not speak. You will not feel. What happens here is not your pain. It is the will of the empire." Then she opened the door and guided Zara inside. The room glowed red, not the color of passion, but of ritual. Candles lined every wall, flickering against silk drapes embroidered with golden suns. A long bed stood in the center, covered in white linen and strewn with rose petals that looked like drops of blood. The air smelled of perfume and iron. Zara stood perfectly still. Her breath came shallow. Her hands trembled only once before she forced them still again. Somewhere in the shadows, a man moved, slow, deliberate, already drunk on ceremony and wine. His footsteps echoed faintly on the marble. When he stepped into the light, she saw him for the first time not as the name written on the marriage contract, but as a living body. Heavy, broad-shouldered, eyes dulled by years of power. He did not greet her, he did not smile. He looked at her the way a merchant looks at a rare object, checking for flaws. When he reached her, he took her wrist and turned her hand over, inspecting the skin as though he might read her worth in its pallor. Her pulse throbbed wildly beneath his thumb, but she made no sound. He released her hand, unhurried, and began to undo his robe. The gold fabric fell to the floor in a whisper. Zara's vision blurred. Her mind retreated somewhere far away. A small, quiet place where she could watch without feeling. It was the same trick she had practiced for months under the supervision of the women who trained her. Do not resist, do not feel. She had mastered the art of vanishing within herself. He approached her. She did not move. He touched her face, tracing the outline of her jaw with a finger that smelled of wine. When he leaned in, she felt the air shift, heavy, close, suffocating. The candles seemed to flicker out of rhythm. The perfume on her skin turned sour in her nose. Then her mind went blank. For a moment, or perhaps an hour, there was only stillness. Then movement. Then nothing again. The world dissolved into fragments. The creak of the bed frame, the sound of fabric tearing, the dull ringing in her ears that drowned out everything else. She did not cry. She did not speak. The sedatives and the training had done their work. When it was over, he stood, adjusted his robe, and left without a word. The door closed softly behind him. Zara lay there, motionless, staring at the canopy above. White silk embroidered with stars. The room was too bright, the air too sweet. Her body ached in places she could not name. But the true pain was deeper, quieter, an ache somewhere beneath thought, beneath breath. It was the realization that she no longer existed in any form she could recognize. Hours later, the women entered. Their footsteps were soft, reverent. They checked the sheets as tradition demanded, for the proof that the empire had taken what it was owed. They whispered blessings that sounded more like measurements. When they were satisfied, they left her alone. The silence that followed was immense. It pressed against the walls, filled the corners, swallowed the candlelight. Zara sat up slowly, her hair tangled, her gown torn, her skin cold. The sedative still blurred her vision, but her mind, that fragile fragment of consciousness that had survived the months of training, began to stir. She realized she could hear her own breathing. It sounded foreign, too fast, too loud. Each inhale dragged something jagged through her chest. Her throat tightened, her heart stuttered. Then came the scream. It erupted from somewhere beneath thought. Primal, piercing, uncontrollable. A sound that shattered the fragile silence of the palace and sent servants scattering down corridors. The guards froze, their faces pale, because they knew this sound. They had heard it before. Every man who guarded the harem had. It was the sound of the ritual completing itself, the moment the mind recognized its own destruction. They called for the physician. He came with his vials and his calm hands. The screaming had stopped by then. Zara was lying still, her body trembling with aftershocks, her eyes wide open but unseeing. The physician touched her wrist, checked her pulse, and nodded. "Normal," he said. "It happens." He ordered that she be given a stronger dose of the opium tonic, enough to calm her, enough to erase the night before dawn. By morning, Zara sat silently beside the window. Her face was serene again, her hands folded neatly in her lap. When her husband entered to see her, she bowed with perfect grace. He smiled faintly, pleased by her composure, and left to attend to state matters. The women whispered later that the princess had been blessed with strength. They called her calmness a miracle. But the truth was far simpler. The miracle was that her body still breathed after her soul had been unmade. And when the winds swept through the marble corridors that afternoon, the guards swore they could still hear the faint echo of a scream long after the sound had died. A sound that belonged not just to Zara, but to every bride who had walked these halls before her, each one carrying the same silence, the same obedience, the same invisible wound. The palace gleamed in the sunlight, the empire continued, and somewhere deep within its perfect architecture, another girl was already being prepared to take her place. The palace never slept, but it never truly woke either. It existed in a kind of shimmering trance, suspended between prayer and punishment, where time moved in slow circles and every corridor carried whispers that were older than the empire itself. After the night of unmaking, Zara became one more silent figure among the veiled women of the harem, a collection of ghosts who still breathed, still smiled, still served, yet had long since ceased to exist as individuals. They called themselves the Sisters of Quiet, a name both ironic and sacred. Each had been a bride once, a daughter once, a voice once. Now they were watchers, caretakers of rituals they no longer believed in, but still obeyed. The harem was their monastery, their asylum, and their prison. It smelled of rose oil and ash. Zara moved among them as if sleepwalking. Days blurred into one another, mornings of silent prayer, afternoons of embroidery, evenings of polite conversation laced with fear. Her mind, still fogged by the opium tonics prescribed by the palace physician, floated just above her body. She could watch herself move, speak, and smile without ever feeling the weight of any of it. The empire had perfected its method of preserving obedience by keeping its victims numb. But others watched her too. Mariam, the overseer of brides, observed Zara closely from a distance. She recognized the early signs of resistance, not rebellion, not yet, but something subtler and far more dangerous: remembrance. Zara's eyes sometimes wandered too long to the palace gates, or lingered on the sound of laughter from the servants' quarters below. To remember, even for a heartbeat, was to invite ruin. Mariam knew this because she had once been like Zara. Decades ago, she too had been led through the golden doors, her body trembling beneath silk and fear. She had screamed as well, a sound she could still hear in her sleep. But unlike Zara, she had learned to bury it so deep that it became the rhythm of her breath. She had survived by becoming part of the mechanism that broke others. Survival demanded complicity. Silence was the tax one paid for endurance. In the evenings, Mariam gathered the younger women in the courtyard for the lesson of reflection, a ritual disguised as devotion. They would kneel around the marble fountain, its surface mirroring the stars, and repeat the words carved into its rim. Obedience is freedom. Memory is the enemy. The chant rose softly, almost melodic, until it blended with the hum of the night insects. Zara repeated the words with the rest, her lips moving automatically, her voice barely audible. But inside, she began to hear another sound, the faint echo of her own scream, carried through memory like smoke through the cracks of a sealed door. She did not yet know what it meant, only that it refused to die. Weeks passed. The rhythm of palace life continued. News of wars and treaties filtered through the servants' gossip. Like distant thunder, the empire was shrinking, the treasury bleeding, the people restless. But inside the marble walls, nothing changed. The women still performed their daily rites, still polished the same silver, still prayed to the same silence. It was on one such morning that Zara met Noura, an older concubine who had long been dismissed from service, but remained in the palace as a caretaker of the archives. Noura's chambers were small, lined with shelves of parchment and ivory tablets. Her hands were stained with ink, her eyes weary but bright. "You walk like someone who remembers," Noura said quietly, when Zara entered. Zara froze. "I don't understand." "Yes, you do." Noura smiled faintly. "You still look at the sky." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Noura took a small wooden box from the shelf and placed it on the table between them. Inside were scraps of paper, letters, fragments, confessions written in the delicate, slanted handwriting of women long dead. "They wrote these in secret," Noura said, "the ones who came before us. They hid them inside the walls, beneath the tiles, in the hems of their gowns. I found them over the years. It is all that remains of their voices." Zara lifted one carefully. The ink had faded to a ghostly brown, the words barely legible. "If you find this, know that I was alive once. My name was not what they called me. My laughter was real. Do not let them take the memory of sound." Her hands trembled as she read. For the first time since her wedding night, she felt something break through the numbness, not terror, not even sadness, but an ache of recognition. She was not alone in her silence. There had been others, countless others, each erased and replaced, yet leaving behind the faintest trace of defiance. Noura leaned closer. "They cannot destroy what is remembered in secret," she whispered. "That is how we survive. That is how we watch." From that day, Zara began to notice things she had once ignored. The tiny marks scratched into the stone of the fountain, not cracks, but letters, initials, hidden beneath the moss. The subtle nods exchanged between the older women, the coded glances, the faint traces of ink smudged on their fingertips after curfew. The harem was not only a place of silence, it was a library of invisible resistance. Each act of obedience had its shadow, a secret word, a stolen gesture, a hidden mark. Beneath the rituals, the women preserved their memories like contraband. They knew the empire's greatest fear was not rebellion, but remembrance. Still Mariam watched. She sensed the shift, the subtle stirring among her brides. She saw Zara's gaze change, no longer vacant, but searching. She confronted Noura one night by the archives. "You play a dangerous game," she said. Noura did not deny it. "The danger is already here," she replied. "You just chose to kneel before it." For a moment, something flickered behind Mariam's eyes. The ghost of the girl she had been, the one who had once screamed just as Zara had. Then she looked away. "There is no freedom in remembrance," she said. "Only pain." Noura smiled sadly. "Pain is proof that something human still remains." After that night, Noura disappeared. The women were told she had been reassigned to another palace, but Zara knew better. The next morning, she found the wooden box beneath her pillow, along with a single line written in fresh ink. "Do not let the silence teach you to forget." From then on, Zara watched differently. She listened to the sounds the palace tried to hide, the creak of doors, the shuffle of bare feet in the corridors after midnight, the low hum of forbidden prayers whispered beneath the sound of the fountain. She began to understand what Noura had meant. Watching was not submission, it was survival. The women of the harem were not powerless after all. They were witnesses, archivists of agony, keepers of memory disguised as compliance. Their silence was not absence, but armor. Sometimes, late at night, Zara would sit by her window, the opium untouched, the air heavy with the scent of rain. And when the wind moved through the palace, carrying faint echoes of laughter, cries and whispers, long forgotten, she would close her eyes and imagine all the women who had once lived and died within these walls, all watching still. The empire continued to polish its marble, to host its ceremonies, to trade its daughters for treaties. But within the harem, something unspoken was beginning to stir. A quiet rebellion woven from the memory of pain and the will to remember. And in the silence between breaths, Zara heard it again. The faint, rising hum beneath the marble floors. Not quite music, not quite prayer. It was the sound of women remembering themselves. The empire liked to think of itself as eternal. It built its palaces from stone that would not erode, carved its decrees into marble that would not fade, and buried its mistakes beneath layers of ceremony so thick that even the air seemed rehearsed. To those who ruled from the throne, obedience was architecture, and silence its foundation. The Sultan believed that peace could be manufactured, that a nation could be ruled as one might tune a stringed instrument by tightening until it no longer trembled. But every empire that teaches silence forgets this. When enough voices are buried, the ground itself begins to hum. Outside the palace, the city decayed in slow motion. Roads turned to mud, markets to dust, the once golden domes dulled beneath soot and rain. But inside Golistan, the illusion persisted. The courtyards were swept clean each morning, the fountains perfumed, the guards polished their boots until they shone like mirrors. Ritual was the empire's anesthetic. It dulled the stench of rot by repeating beauty until no one questioned its cost. Zara lived within this illusion now, a silent ornament who had learned to move through ceremony without thought. Yet her mind, that hidden ember Noura had refused to let die, still flickered. She watched the empire as Mariam once had, but with different eyes. Mariam had watched to preserve the system. Zara watched to understand it. She saw how power flowed, not like a river, but like blood through veins. Hidden, pulsating, always returning to the same heart. Each command from the throne passed through layers of bureaucracy, courtiers, priests, and guards before reaching the women's quarters. By the time it arrived, it was no longer law. It was breath. It entered the lungs of every servant, every bride, every child, until obedience became instinct. No one had to tell them to be silent anymore. They simply were. That was the empire's true genius. It did not need chains. It built cages out of memory. Zara began to notice the faint parallels between her own life and the empire's decline. When the court historians wrote of the wars lost in the north, of the fields abandoned to drought, of the merchants turning to foreign ports, she saw herself in their words. Her body was the empire's reflection, adorned, decaying, haunted by rituals that no longer served a living purpose. The palace physicians prescribed more tonics, more perfume, more silence, and yet the sickness deepened. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, the Shah summoned his council for a rare open address in the Hall of Mirrors. Zara was not permitted to attend, but from her chamber's lattice she could glimpse the reflections, the shimmer of silk, the glint of jeweled turbans, the distorted faces bending in glass. The Shah spoke of rebellion in the western provinces, of the need for loyalty, for purity, for the restoration of order. His voice echoed through the marble corridors like a sermon. But behind those words was fear. The same fear she had heard in the overseers when a bride screamed. Power, she realized, was not built on strength. It was built on terror. the terror of being remembered for what one truly was. After the speech, whispers spread through the palace like smoke. The empire was bleeding faster than anyone would admit. Armies were deserting. Merchants were fleeing. And yet, within the harem, the same rituals continued, as if ceremony could hold back collapse. The women still practiced their bows and prayers. The overseers still recited their hymns. The fountain still sang the same lie. Obedience is peace. Zara no longer knelt during the recitations. She moved her lips, but no sound came. Mariam noticed, of course. One afternoon, she approached Zara beneath the cypress trees. "You are forgetting yourself," Mariam said softly. Zara turned to her. "No," she replied. "I am remembering." Something in Mariam's face cracked, not visibly, but internally, like a hairline fracture in glass. For the first time in years, she did not have an answer ready. Her silence was not command, but uncertainty. That night, the overseers met in secret. They whispered of Zara, the quiet girl whose presence unsettled the rhythm of their obedience. Some argued she should be punished. Others hesitated. "She does not rebel," one said. "She only looks." But that was enough. In an empire of silence, to look was treason. The next morning, the guards came for her under the guise of a physician's summons. She was escorted through corridors she had never seen, narrow, windowless, lined with faded tapestries depicting the conquests of kings long dead. The air grew colder as they descended. When the doors opened, she found herself in a vast chamber lit by a single torch. It was the Hall of Records, where the empire kept its most sacred documents, treaties, birth registries, confessions. Shelves reached up into darkness, filled with scrolls bound in red silk. At the center of the room sat an old man, bent and thin, his eyes hidden behind spectacles. "Sit," he said without looking up. Zara obeyed. He unrolled a parchment. "You are the wife of General Hassan Khan," he began, voice flat. "You are accused of improper conduct, of speech unbecoming a consort of the imperial line. Do you deny it?" "I have spoken only in prayer," she said. "Perhaps prayer is the crime," he murmured. Then, looking up, he studied her face. "Do you know what happens to those who disrupt harmony?" Zara met his gaze. "They are remembered." He flinched as if struck. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then he rolled the parchment and dismissed her. No verdict, no punishment. Only a single phrase muttered under his breath as she turned to leave. The archives remember everything. Back in her chambers, Zara found the wooden box still hidden beneath her bed. Inside were the letters of the forgotten brideswomen who had been erased, their stories stripped from the records. She realized now why Noura had trusted her with them. Memory itself was resistance. That night, Zara did something forbidden. She took ink and parchment and began to write, not as a confession, but as a chronicle. Her words were slow, deliberate, sacred. She described the scream that still echoed through the halls, the lessons of obedience, the overseers who prayed to silence, and the faint hum beneath the marble that would not die. She wrote for the women who could not, for the empire that refused to hear, for the memory that might one day outlive its masters. When dawn came, she hid the pages beneath the tiles of her chamber. The act was small, invisible, but irreversible. It was the first time in her life she had chosen to do something unsanctioned, to breathe on her own terms. The empire continued as if nothing had changed. The ceremonies resumed. The Shah's decrees were issued. But somewhere, deep beneath the gold and marble, the foundations trembled, not from revolt, not yet, but from the slow awakening of the buried. In every corner of Golistan, whispers began to move again. The Sisters of Quiet exchanged glances that lasted a little too long. The overseers hesitated before giving commands. The silence that had once been their weapon began to waver, to thin, to crack. The empire still believed it ruled through fear, but fear was no longer loyal. It had begun to remember its own history, and through the endless corridors of the palace, through the mirrors and the marble, through the heavy curtains of incense and ash, Zara felt the hum grow louder. That faint vibration in the walls, like breath beneath stone. The sound of memory returning, the sound of silence preparing to speak. The night Zara died, the palace did not notice. The clocks continued to tick, the fountains still murmured, and the moon hung motionless above the dome of Golistan like an unblinking eye. The empire was busy collapsing, not with an explosion, but with the slow suffocation of something that had forgotten how to breathe. Outside, the capital smoldered with rebellion. Inside, the Shah's guards paced marble corridors, more out of habit than command. Power had become ritual, and ritual had become decay. Zara's final evening began like any other. The servants lit the candles, the concubines whispered their prayers, and the overseers performed the nightly inspections that had long ceased to mean anything. She sat by the window of her chamber, watching the courtyard below, where stray dogs scavenged among the garden stones. The wind carried the scent of rain and smoke. Somewhere beyond the palace walls, something was burning. She had known this was coming. The signs had been there for months. The empty storehouses, the soldiers demanding back pay, the courtiers selling jewels in secret. The empire was disintegrating in slow motion, dissolving into the same silence it had forced upon its women. It was poetic, she thought, the great machine that had turned obedience into policy, now choking on its own quiet. In the corner of her room, the wooden box waited. It had been her secret for years, a collection of forbidden things, letters, fragments, names. The words of women who had been erased. She had copied them carefully, preserving the tremor in their handwriting, the small stains of tears that the paper had absorbed. Over time, the box had become her heart, wooden, locked, and pulsing with ghosts. She knew what she must do. At midnight, she wrapped herself in a dark shawl and left her chambers. The corridors were empty, the guards drunk or asleep. The marble floors whispered beneath her bare feet. She moved like a memory, a soft shape through a hall of mirrors that had seen too much and remembered too little. She passed the chamber where she had been prepared as a bride. The walls still smelled faintly of rosewater and opium. She passed the hall of records where her name had once been written in red ink beside her husband's. She passed the fountain in the inner courtyard where women had once washed their hands after breaking other girls. Each step felt like walking backward through time. She reached the lower garden just before the rain began. The air was thick, trembling. In the center stood the old cypress, the one that Nora had said could hear the dead. Zara knelt at its roots and began to dig. The soil was wet, heavy, reluctant to open. But she kept going, her hands covered in earth, her breath steady, the rhythm of a prayer she had not been taught, but remembered from somewhere deeper. When the hole was deep enough, she placed the box inside. "These are your daughters," she whispered to the tree. "Remember their names when the empire forgets them." For a long moment, she stayed there, her hands pressed to the ground, listening to the sound of rain hitting the leaves, listening for an answer. She thought she heard one, a faint sound beneath the storm, like the hum of buried voices. Then she stood, trembling, her body older than her years, and looked up at the dark palace. It no longer frightened her. Inside, chaos was beginning. Servants were whispering of soldiers at the gates, of the Shah preparing to flee. The empire that had once felt eternal now seemed fragile, absurd, a machine of obedience collapsing under its own weight. Zara walked through it unseen, past terrified courtiers and weeping wives, past ministers clutching ledgers, past guards too uncertain to salute. No one stopped her. She was a ghost moving among the living. By dawn, the first cannons sounded. From her balcony, Zara watched the horizon flare with fire. The city was rising, peasants, soldiers, merchants, all turning against the silence that had ruled them. For the first time in her life, she heard the sound of rebellion, not as chaos, but as truth. The empire's silence had been broken by a single human scream, multiplied 1,000 times. It was the same sound that had echoed through the palace when she was 16, the sound of something inside the human spirit refusing to die. She felt no joy, only clarity. The walls that had held her, trained her, destroyed her. They were not indestructible, they were only stone, and stone too erodes. As the sun rose over Golistan, the fighting reached the palace gates. Smoke poured through the courtyards, mingling with the scent of jasmine and gunpowder. Zara's servants begged her to hide. She refused. She stood in her chamber, calm, as the sound of footsteps and shouts grew closer. When the door burst open, it was not soldiers but young rebels' boys barely older than she had been on her wedding night. They looked at her with confusion, unsure whether to fear her or protect her. "There's nothing here worth saving," she said quietly. "Take what you need." They did not understand, but they obeyed. When they left, she returned to the window. The palace was burning now. The Hall of Mirrors first, then the women's quarters, then the outer walls. Flames climbed the sky like confession. Zara watched them rise, reflected in her dark eyes. For the first time, the palace looked alive. Not sacred, not eternal, and just mortal, fragile, human. She felt her strength fading. The long years of sedatives, sleeplessness, and silence had left her body thin and brittle. But her mind, that last defiant spark, burned clear. She wrote one final letter, her handwriting slow but steady. "To whoever finds this, if you are reading these words, then the empire has already fallen, or soon will." Beneath the cypress in the lower garden lies a box of truths the world was not meant to know. It contains the names of those the palace erased. Do not weep for them, remember them. We were not wives, we were witnesses. The walls may burn, but memory does not. Z. When she finished, she folded the paper and placed it beneath her pillow. She lay down, her breath slowing. The smoke reached her window, curling through the curtains like incense. Somewhere in the distance, the cypress groaned in the wind. The fire spread through the palace that night, devouring centuries of marble and silk. When dawn came, only the outer walls remained. The Shah was gone, the archives destroyed, the throne empty. In the ruins, among the ash, rebels found the charred remnants of the women's quarters, and in one chamber, untouched by flame, a single body resting as if asleep. They buried her beneath the same cypress where she had buried the box. The grave was unmarked, the name was not recorded, but the ground remembered. Years passed, the empire dissolved, new rulers came, and with them new silences. The palace was restored, its walls repainted, its horrors forgotten, at least officially. But those who walked its corridors after midnight sometimes reported hearing a sound. Not the echo of footsteps or the rustle of silk, a softer sound, like breath under stone, like whispers rising from the ground. They said it came from the gardens near the old cypress. They said it sounded like women remembering how to speak. And if you stand there today, when the moon is full and the wind moves through the leaves, you can still hear it, faint but unbroken. The hum of the forgotten, the pulse of those who would not stay, erased. Because the truth of empires is this: they do not die when their rulers fall. They die when the people they silenced begin to speak again. And somewhere beneath the roots of Golistan, beneath the marble and the history and the centuries of ash, Zara's words still wait. A box of names, a seed of memory, a whisper that became an echo, and that echo is still growing.